I guess the big news really this week is about the stimulus bill, that $1.9 trillion President Biden is proposing. It was thought it might be bipartisan. Now it looks like he's going to really push it through no matter whether Republicans come aboard or not. You were in the Obama administration when you went for a big stimulus package, and some people think you didn't go far and fast enough. Do you agree with President Biden's approach that he's got to get this thing through?
Let me just first say, David, that I don't think there's any question that in retrospect, it would have been better if we'd done larger stimulus during the Obama administration. I think we understood that at the time. The constraint, read President Obama's memoirs, was not an economic judgment. It was a political judgment about what could pass through the Congress, given the consensus that existed at that time, given where Republicans were, and given where Democrats like Senator Kent Conrad and Byron Dorgan and Nelson from Nebraska were at that time. So I think the lesson that we need more stimulus, we wish we'd had more stimulus, is really a valid lesson. I'm not in a position to judge the tactics. It's certainly better to do things on a bipartisan basis, but negotiation is about leverage. And if the Democrats have no capacity to act on their own, they don't have much leverage in a bipartisan negotiation. And so if it's come to the point where they need to do it unilaterally, then that's where it's come to. So I'm not prepared at all to second guess that political judgment. It's a political judgment, not an economic judgment, and it may well be necessary given the intransigence of today's Republican Party. I think the really important issues, David, go to how we think about fiscal policy over the course of the whole year. And we need to make sure we're supporting demand. We need to make sure that we're helping people who are in need. We need to take the kind of different perspective on fiscal policy that recent economic thinking about secular stagnation, about low rates, has driven us to. But that's not a reason for blank checks. And that's not a reason why any amount of fiscal policy organized in any way is appropriate. And I look at the fiscal stimulus under discussion, and with the $1.9 trillion, you're talking about something that relative to the GDP gap is 6 times as large as what we did in 2008. And if that's what we're going to do, we need to make sure we've got a contingency plan in case we get a perfect combination of good news.
Let's shift briefly from fiscal to monetary policy. In this program, we spoke with Sebastian Mallaby. You know him, and we talked about what he refers to as froth in the markets right now because of the reasons you know so well, because so much liquidity, and whether the Fed could really address that. And he said in history, the Fed traditionally has said, let's wait till the bubble bursts and then pick up at the aftermath. He didn't think that was necessarily an effective way to do it. Do you think there is froth in the marketplace, and is that the right approach to deal with it?
I think you can't look at what happened at GameStop. You can't look at some of the things that are happening and say there's no froth in the marketplace. But monetary policy is a pretty blunt instrument. It touches everything from small business borrowing rates to overall stock market multiples to mortgage rates for homeowners. And so unless you have pretty pervasive froth, I worry about using monetary policy as a tool, and I worry about being wrong. Alan Greenspan made his famous statement about irrational exuberance in the fall of 1996, when the Dow was at 6,300. In retrospect, it's pretty clear there was no froth then. Everybody at the time of the 1987 crash believed that it was a product of a tremendous amount of froth that had built up in the summer of 1987. But if you look at a graph of stock prices today, it's far from clear that there was froth at that time, really. So I worry that you have to be very sure of yourself about froth to go running around trying to burst bubbles with the blunt instrument of monetary policy.
So let's conclude with a rapid fire round of Summer Says and pick up on something you just said. Number one, you referred to GameStop. If we end up with Robin Hood against the regulators in Washington, because the regulators are certainly going after this thing, who's going to win?
Regulators. I think you're going to see a lot of attention to issues around manipulation and retail protection. I don't feel I know what the right public policy answers are, but I think there's a pretty pervasive and pretty valid sense that the spectacle of the last 2 weeks and the possible systemic risk that could have happened of another LTCM type situation in the last 2 weeks, that public policy should be working to avoid that. And I suspect that we'll see new rules and regulations.
We heard this week from the Bank of England, and they didn't change any of their decision making, but they once again sort of had it both ways on negative interest rates. We're not doing it now. We're not saying we're going to do it, but don't be surprised if we do it at some point down the road. When history is written, will negative interest rates prove to have been a success or a failure?
I don't think they're going to be remembered as a great success. I think they're going to be remembered more as a sign of desperation at a very difficult time. And people are going to wish that we had used fiscal policy more actively. And so there'd been less need for monetary policy.
And finally, take us forward 12 months. What will the inflation rate in the United States be? And what will the unemployment rate be?
I think unemployment's going to be significantly lower than people now expect. And I think inflation, and especially inflationary expectations, are going to escalate more rapidly than most people expect. I think we're, for the first time in a generation, going to have to contend with rising inflation expectations and possible inflationary psychology as a genuine issue. I think we're going to be there within a year or 18 months.